Hi, I'm Randy Tyson from the Legion of Reason diversion with another one of our Piehole monologues. Perhaps you have recently discovered that some people are trying to redefine the term racism. In the common usage, racism means, according to the Oxford Dictionary, prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. But some people have taken to redefine racism as prejudice plus power. This can be traced back to Pat Biddle's 1970 book titled Developing New Perspectives on Race, and it was popularized by Judith Katz in her 1978 book White Awareness, Handbook for Anti-Racism Training. It is important to push for the understanding that racism is prejudice plus power, and therefore people of color cannot be racist against whites in the United States. People of color can be prejudiced against whites, but clearly do not have the power as a group to enforce that prejudice. This definition was later incorporated into critical race theory, a sociological construct which sees the institutionalization of racism and oppression in American society. It is outside the scope of this monologue to assess its merits, if indeed it has any. I will simply say that if some of the worst ideologies in history, such as Marxism and postmodernism, and the study of race relations got together and had a baby, they would have named it critical race theory. Such a simplistic view of where power lies that critical race theory paints isn't nearly always correct. For instance, can it be reasonably denied that a white student attending an otherwise all non-white school is not going to experience racism? Such a student would herself be powerless despite the privilege her skin color is supposed to provide in this paradigm. But critical race theory would have you believe that such situations can't occur. My counterexample clearly demonstrates a fatal flaw, and it is hardly the only example that I could have presented. People of color do indeed occupy positions of power. They are judges, lawyers, chiefs of police, university professors, and one even occupies, shock and surprise, the presidency of the United States. Critical race theory is a highly selective view of power dynamics where only whites can attain both power and prejudice, and ignores the many instances where this assumption is simply false. As philosopher Lawrence Bloom says in his book I'm Not a Racist But, about what constitutes being a racist, quote, "It is the content of attitudes and beliefs that makes them racist, not whether their possessors have the power to put them into practice." A recent example demonstrating the absurdities redefining racism as prejudice plus power can produce occurred at the now notorious Goldsmiths University in London. Bahar Mustafa was the student union diversity officer who, after ironically banning white people from attending a meeting about diversity, made this claim.
Furthermore, there have been charges made against me that I am racist and sexist to white men. I want to explain why this is false. I, an ethnic minority woman, cannot be racist or sexist towards white men because racism and sexism describe structures of privilege based on race and gender. And therefore women of colour and minority genders cannot be racist or sexist, since we do not stand to benefit from such a system. In order for our actions to have been deemed racist or sexist, the current system would have to be one which enables only people of colour and women to benefit economically and socially on such a large scale, and to the systematic exclusion of white people and men, who for the past 400 years would have had to have been subjected to colonisation.
If that doesn't sound ridiculous to you, I'd be interested in knowing why not. She's using a sociological definition of racism and sexism from a number of available definitions, designed for use at the level of societies to excuse her clearly racist and sexist actions as an individual. But these are two completely different domains. The critical race theory model of prejudice plus power is meant to look at groups at a societal level, not at the level of the individual. Her actions may indeed give no benefit to women of color as a group, but she clearly benefits, if only to satisfy her obvious and intense dislike of white men. This was clearly demonstrated when she publicly declared that the use of "kill all white men" in social media is perfectly acceptable, thus managing the difficult task of being racist, sexist, and simply a horrible person in a single hashtag. This brings me to the question of why redefining racism and sexism in this manner has so much appeal. It's really quite simple. It provides people of color with permission to be racist and women to be sexist without the messy inconvenience of having those labels stick, at least in their own minds. It allows people like Bahar Mustafa to bypass their own sensibilities regarding right and wrong in treating whites and men in a manner which they would not themselves want to be treated. One of the biggest problems of critical race theory and its feminist cousin is that it demands white men such as myself apologize for their immutable characteristics of being white and men. I will never do such a thing. Worse, its lack of nuance implies all whites are racist and all men are sexist, thus committing the ecological fallacy. Whites who are against racism and men who are against sexism are considered to be enemies rather than potential allies when they are assumed a priori to be sexists and racists, based on no more than their identities. Critical race theory also induces self-pity, something akin to narcissistic victim syndrome, since it claims all people of color and all women are oppressed, and adherents love to play that card. While there are indeed many cases where this is true, there are far too many counterexamples to accept critical race theory as a true representation of race and gender relations in reality. And the worst thing about these redefinitions of racism and sexism, they are applied based solely on skin color and gender. In other words, they are themselves racist and sexist definitions of these terms. The best thing we can do when presented with this nonsense is to reject them entirely and stick with their dictionary definitions. Thanks for watching.